Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, the forest holds secrets too dark to explain. Strange lights in the hollows, creatures that move in silence, and cursed places where even animals refuse to go. Tonight, you'll hear true accounts from people who faced the unexplained. These aren't stories. They're real encounters that will make you think twice before wandering alone in the mountains. These videos take a lot of time and dedication to create. If you want to support my efforts, the best way is to like, share, and subscribe. It really means a lot. Your support helps keep these chilling tales alive. And don't forget to comment below and let me know where you're listening from. Okay, if you're ready, let's step into tonight's terrifying stories. My name is Daniel Carter. I was born in 1981 in a small coal town tucked into the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. To most people outside the region, these mountains are just another range on a map. But for those of us raised here, the ridges, the hollows, and the deep forest valleys are more than just land. They carry stories, memories, warnings, and sometimes shadows that do not belong to the daylight world. I grew up with the mountains as both a playground and a teacher. When I was a boy, my grandfather used to take me on long walks through the woods. He taught me how to read the moss on trees, how to tell when a storm was coming by the smell in the air, and how to listen for the difference between a deer moving through leaves and something else. He was not a superstitious man, not in the way some old-timers were, but he believed that certain places carried weight. He told me to respect them, to never mock the stories, and to trust the instincts that told me when to turn back. One of those places was Black Hollow. Black Hollow was not on any official hiking maps. It was more of a local path, a narrow trail that branched off from an old logging road and slipped down into a shaded valley between two steep ridges. I first heard the name when I was maybe 10 years old. My grandfather pointed to the mouth of the hollow one autumn evening as the sun was going down. The trees there were darker, the shadows thicker, and even as a child I could feel a sort of pressure in the air. He told me never to go there after dark. When I asked why, he just said, "Some lights are not meant to be followed." As I got older, I heard bits and pieces of local lore. People talked about strange lanterns that would appear in the hollow at night. Some said they belonged to miners who had died in cave-ins generations earlier. Others said they were something older, something that had been here before the coal camps and the roads. I didn't take those stories too seriously. Folks in the mountains love a good ghost tale, and most of them never leave the county. So legends grow like vines in the dark. By the time I was in my 20s, I had turned into something of a hiking addict. I spent most weekends out on trails, carrying only a backpack, a knife, and sometimes a cheap camera. I liked being alone in the woods. There was a peace in the silence, a break from the noise of everyday life. Black Hollow became one of my favorite trails, despite my grandfather's warning. In daylight, it was beautiful. The trees leaned close together, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into green and gold. The air always seemed cooler there, as if the hollow carried the memory of winter even in July. On September 10th, 2005, I made a decision that still haunts me. It was a Saturday, clear and mild. I left early in the morning, parking my truck on the side of the logging road and starting down the trail with just a flashlight, a bottle of water, and a knife. I wasn't planning an overnight trip, just a long day hike to clear my head. I walked slowly, enjoying the way the sunlight slipped between the trees and the sound of leaves crunching under my boots. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Even the birds seemed to avoid the hollow. Around midday, I stopped to eat a sandwich and drink water near a moss-covered rock. I thought about turning back then, but something in me wanted to keep going. The deeper trails always held a kind of pull, as if the forest itself was daring me to see how far I would go. I lost track of time. That was my first mistake. The sun was already dropping when I realized I was still deep inside the hollow. The sky was streaked orange through the canopy, and shadows stretched long across the trail. A sharp unease crawled over me, the kind I usually got when a storm was coming, but the air was still. I remember my grandfather's warning, and for the first time it echoed in my mind with weight. Never be in Black Hollow after dark. I turned on my flashlight as the last light drained from the sky. The beam looked weak against the darkness pressing in. The forest at night is never silent, but that evening it was as if the entire hollow was holding its breath. No crickets, no owls, not even the distant sound of water. Just silence so deep it made my ears ring. That was when I saw the light. At first it was faint, just a glow far down the trail. I thought maybe it was another hiker with a lantern. Relief touched me for a moment. If someone else was out there, maybe I could follow them back. But as I watched, I realized something was wrong. The glow didn't sway like a lantern carried by hand. It pulsed faintly, as if breathing. It floated a few feet above the ground, moving steadily forward without sound. I froze. My flashlight shook in my hand, the beam trembling across the trees. The light ahead seemed to pause too, almost like it knew I was watching. Then, without warning, it began to move toward me. Panic shot through me. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt heavy. The glow grew closer, steady and patient, closing the distance without haste. My mind raced for explanations. Fireflies clustered together, swamp gas, even the reflection of my own light. But none of them fit. This was no trick of the eyes. This was something real, and it was coming straight for me. I finally broke free of my paralysis and turned to run. Branches tore at my arms, and my pack slammed against my back as I sprinted up the trail. I didn't look behind me, but I could feel it there, pressing against the air, following. My flashlight flickered, then steadied, and for a sick moment I thought I heard footsteps behind me, though the ground was soft with leaves. The trail stretched on like a nightmare. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but still I ran. When I burst out of the hollow and onto the ridge where the trees thinned, I dared to glance back. The light had stopped. It hovered at the edge of the hollow, flickering faintly like a candle in the wind. It didn't cross into the open, almost as if the hollow itself was its prison. Slowly it began to fade, dissolving into the dark until only the memory of its glow remained. I stumbled the rest of the way to my truck, shaking, drenched in sweat. I sat there with the doors locked for nearly an hour before I could bring myself to drive away. But the story didn't end that night. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory. I saw the glow every time I closed my eyes. I dreamed of being pulled into the hollow, of walking endlessly toward a light I couldn't escape. I avoided the woods for weeks, but the pull of the mountains is strong, and finally I started asking questions. I spoke to an older neighbor, a man in his 70s who had lived his whole life in the county. When I mentioned Black Hollow, his face tightened. He told me people had been seeing the lantern for as long as anyone could remember. Some believed it was a miner lost in the 1800s, searching for a way out. Others believed it was not human at all, but something that lured wanderers deeper into the dark, where they disappeared forever. He said a few hunters had gone missing there over the years. Their bodies were never found. I tried to brush it off, but the fear clung to me. Nights became hard. I would wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I had seen a glow outside my window. Once, driving home late, I caught a flicker of light in the trees along the road and nearly ran off into a ditch. I never went back to Black Hollow. Even now, almost 20 years later, the memory sits in me like a stone. When I think about that night, about the way the light moved toward me in total silence, my skin crawls. I wonder what would have happened if I had stood my ground. Would it have reached me? Would I have followed it deeper into the hollow, never to be seen again? Some lights are not meant to be followed, and I know, without doubt, that my grandfather was right. The legend of the Lantern of Black Hollow fits into a wider Appalachian tradition of what locals call spook lights or ghost lights. Across the mountain regions of the United States, from the Ozarks to the Smokies, there have been countless reports of mysterious floating lights, sometimes white, sometimes blue, sometimes like a dim lantern glow, that move without a clear source. Some scientists believe these lights could be caused by natural gas seeping from the ground, swamp gases igniting in the air, or even strange reflections from headlights in the distance. But people who grew up in the Appalachians know that not every story can be explained by science. The lights appear in places far too deep in the forest, with no roads or cars anywhere near them. They appear in front of lone travelers, often in near total silence. And more chillingly, many people claim the lights don't just float randomly. They seem to move with intent, as if leading, or even luring. In Daniel's case, the light did not behave like any natural phenomenon. It hovered at a human height, pulsed faintly as if alive, and stopped when he stopped. It seemed aware of him. It pursued him only as far as the hollow itself, vanishing once he escaped the boundaries of that place. This suggests the light is tied to the land, or perhaps to something that happened there long ago. Some locals believe it is the spirit of a lost miner searching endlessly for a way out. Others whisper that it is something older, a presence that predates coal mining and even settlement in the area, a kind of forest trickster that leads travelers astray. In Appalachian folklore, there are many stories of will-o'-the-wisp type lights that tempt wanderers deeper into danger, never to be seen again. What makes Daniel's account so unsettling is not just what he saw, but how he describes the silence, the weight in the air, and the way the forest itself seemed to stop breathing while the light appeared. For him, it was not just a trick of the eyes, but a living presence, something that watched him, measured him, and ultimately let him go. The unanswered question lingers. What would have happened if he had not run? Would the light have led him deeper into the hollow, until he too became another name whispered in local stories of disappearances? Or did he survive only because he respected his instinct and his grandfather's warning, escaping just in time? In the end, the story of the lantern on Black Hollow Trail remains unresolved. It is part of the living folklore of the Appalachians, half warning, half mystery, and perhaps that is the most chilling truth of all. Some lights, no matter how inviting, are not meant to be followed. My name is Thomas Reed. I was born in the mountains of North Carolina, just outside a small town called Boone. Growing up in the Appalachians, I always knew the land had its secrets. Some were beautiful, like hidden waterfalls, wild berries, and trails known only to hunters. Others were darker, like the sudden cold spots in the forest where no birds sang, or the old abandoned cabins that children were dared to enter, but adults avoided without explanation. I was never the type to believe much in ghost stories. My father was a logger. My mother worked at the local school, and life was simple, practical. I heard the same legends every Appalachian kid did: witches, haints, things that stalked the ridges at night. But I treated them as nothing more than stories. I spent my teenage years fishing, hiking, and later hunting deep into the backcountry. By the time I was in my 30s, I considered myself a man who knew the woods well enough to separate fact from superstition. That belief shattered in the fall of 2012. It was October, one of those crisp evenings when the trees were burning with red and gold, and the air smelled of leaves and wood smoke. I had been bow hunting deer that day, setting out early before dawn and hiking up toward Raven's Gap, a narrow pass between two ridges about an hour from town. The Gap was a quiet place, rarely used except by hunters and the occasional hiker. I didn't see much game that day, only a few does too far off to take a shot. As the sun began to dip behind a ridge, I decided to call it and make my way back. The forest was painted orange with the last light, and a thin mist had started creeping up from the lower ground. It was beautiful in the kind of way that made you stop and breathe it in, but also unsettling, because in the mountains, beauty and danger often walked hand in hand. I was halfway down the trail when I heard it, a slow, deliberate crack of branches behind me. At first I thought it was another hunter, maybe heading back late. I stopped, waited, but saw nothing. The forest grew still. Then, after a moment, another sound, closer this time. The unease that spread through me was sharp and cold. I know the woods well enough to tell the difference between a deer, a bear, or a person. This was none of those. The steps were too slow, too heavy, almost measured. I tightened my grip on my bow and continued, my pace quickening. The trail twisted down through the gap, and shadows stretched long across the trees. That was when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a tree out of place, something tall and narrow standing at the bend of the path. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was moving. It stepped forward into the fading light, and I saw it clearly. The creature was tall, easily over 7 feet, and impossibly thin, with arms that seemed too long for its body. Its head was narrow, almost featureless except for 2 pale, reflective eyes that caught what little light remained. Its skin looked gray, stretched tight like old leather. Every part of me wanted to run, but my body locked. It moved closer, slow and deliberate, its long arms swaying slightly. I felt a strange pressure on my chest, as if I wasn't just seeing it, but it was seeing me in some deeper way. Fear turned into raw panic. And then, before I even thought about what I was doing, my body reacted. I swung, with all the strength in me. I lashed out with the bow still in my hand, striking the creature across its shoulder and neck. It staggered back, more surprised than hurt, its long arms flailing as if it didn't expect me to fight. That moment was all I needed. I ran. I tore down the trail, heart hammering, not daring to look back. My boots pounded the dirt. My breath came in ragged gasps, and every step I expected to feel those long arms reaching for me. Somehow, I reached my truck, threw myself inside, and sped down the mountain road without a second glance. When I finally reached home, I slammed the door shut, locked everything, and sat in the dark of my living room, trying to calm down. My rational mind tried to explain it away. Maybe a man in a mask, maybe the light playing tricks. But the memory of those pale eyes followed me even with my eyes closed. I thought it was over. But that night, I learned it wasn't. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a noise outside my bedroom window. A slow scrape, like fingers against glass. My heart froze. My house sat on a slope, with my bedroom window looking out toward the woods. I lived alone, and no neighbor was within shouting distance. I stayed still, listening, praying it was a branch. Then, faintly, I saw it. A tall, dark shape standing just beyond the edge of the yard, pale eyes reflecting the moonlight. Watching, my stomach turned to ice. Somehow, impossibly, it had followed me. From Raven's Gap, down the mountain roads, all the way to my home. It had not attacked on the trail, but had not forgotten me either. For weeks after that night, I barely slept. I would catch glimpses of movement near the tree line, tall and silent. Sometimes at dusk, sometimes deep into the night. I never saw it up close again, but I always felt its eyes on me. The sense of being watched became constant. I stopped hunting alone. I stopped hiking Raven's Gap altogether. To this day, I don't know what it was. Some locals I later spoke with said they heard of a watcher in those woods, a tall, faceless thing that followed people who disturbed it. They said it didn't always attack, but once it saw you, once you fought against it, it would never stop watching. I don't know if that's true. All I know is that I saw something in the Appalachians that night that should not exist, and though I escaped with my life, I have never truly escaped its gaze. And even now, years later, on quiet nights when the mist settles low and the woods fall silent, I sometimes feel it still, standing just beyond the trees, waiting. The experience Thomas Reed describes is one of the most terrifying encounters reported in the Appalachian Mountains, and it connects to a much older pattern of stories from the region. At first glance, what he saw could be labeled as a cryptid, one of those tall, thin creatures that sometimes get lumped into categories like Slender Man or stick figures. But what makes his story different is the way the thing reacted, the way it followed him home, and the way its presence lingered long after the first encounter. Appalachian folklore is full of entities that don't just appear in the woods, but actually follow people back into their lives. Some old-timers call them watchers or shadows of the ridge. Unlike ghosts, which stay bound to one place, these figures seem attached to the person they encounter. Once seen, they continue to appear, often just at the edge of vision, waiting. The description Thomas gives, a tall, impossibly thin figure with pale eyes, arms too long for its body, and a featureless face, lines up closely with oral stories from both the Cherokee and early settlers. The Cherokee warned of a tall man-shaped being that could follow hunters silently and take away their strength. Settlers told of the Night Watcher, an inhuman guardian said to stalk Raven's Gap, chasing off anyone who stayed too long near the pass. Both traditions described the same pattern, a thing that watches first, then follows. And always, the warning is clear. If you fight it, you make yourself known to it forever. Skeptics might argue that Thomas simply encountered a bear standing upright or a trick of shadows. Panic in the woods can make the mind invent things. But Thomas was a lifelong hunter, a man who knew bears, bobcats, and even the odd Black Panther sightings reported in those hills. He swore this was something else. Others point to sleep paralysis or stress hallucinations for the nighttime encounters. But that doesn't explain the physical confrontation in Raven's Gap, the swing of the bow, the staggering movement of the figure, and the raw instinct that drove him to run. Nor does it explain the fact that weeks later, he continued to see the tall shadow at the tree line near his home. The most unsettling part of Thomas's account is not the fight itself, but what followed. He escaped, yes. He hit the thing and fled, reaching his truck and his home. But in the act of striking it, he may have done more than defend himself. He may have marked himself. Many mountain stories warn that acknowledging or touching a supernatural being gives it power over you. Ignoring a watcher, or running before it notices, may allow you to escape. But standing your ground, making contact, or showing defiance may invite it to attach itself to you personally. That could explain why the creature followed him down from Raven's Gap, a place where it might otherwise have stayed. In hitting it, Thomas didn't drive it away. He drew its attention forever. From that night onward, it didn't just guard the gap. It guarded him. Another question lingers. If this thing could follow him all the way home, if it could stand outside his window at night, why didn't it attack directly? Why didn't it break in and finish what it started? One explanation is that it didn't need to. Appalachian watchers aren't always described as killers. Sometimes they are tormentors. They sap sleep, instill paranoia, and watch until a person breaks down. For Thomas, the real horror was not death, but the constant feeling of being observed, never safe even in his own home. Another possibility is darker still. Maybe it was waiting for another night, another moment of weakness, another chance when he would be alone in the woods again. Many legends describe these creatures as patient beyond human measure, able to wait years for the right moment. There's one final twist that makes Thomas's story more chilling. In the months after his encounter, he noticed the figure less often. He assumed maybe it had gone, or maybe his mind had finally let go of the trauma. But what if the absence was not relief, but strategy? If the creature was tied to him because of that violent strike, it may not have vanished at all. It may simply have grown better at hiding. It may be closer than ever, waiting in silence. And Thomas might only see it again when it finally chooses to act. The Watcher at Raven's Gap is more than a cryptid sighting. It is part of an older Appalachian pattern. Entities that observe, pursue, and attach themselves to individuals who cross a certain line. Whether it is a trick of the mind, a spirit of the ridge, or something older that walks these mountains, one truth remains. In Appalachia, when you feel eyes on you in the woods, you are not wrong. Something is watching, and sometimes, if you acknowledge it, if you swing at it, fight it, or even look too long, it will follow you home. My name is Samuel Price. I was raised in the Appalachian Mountains, near a little hollow in western North Carolina. I spent most of my life in those woods, walking old trails, hunting, fishing, and working odd jobs in nearby towns. People always said I was a mountain boy through and through. And I was proud of that. I knew the hills, the streams, and the ridges better than most people I met. I knew the sound of an owl from a mile off, the way fog rolled down the valleys at dawn, and how to read the weather by the smell of the air. The mountains raised me. But even though I knew the land, I didn't always know what lived in it. This story happened in the late fall of 2012. I was 34 years old at the time, living in a small cabin near Ashburn Creek. My cabin was isolated, no close neighbors, no streetlights, no noise except the steady rush of the creek out back. I liked the peace, but sometimes peace can turn to silence, and silence can turn to something far worse. What I'm about to share is not a campfire tale. It is not something I made up to scare you. It is what I lived, and I don't tell it lightly. Even now, years later, when I close my eyes at night, I see them again, those hollow eyes in the dark. Ashburn Creek was a shallow, rocky stream that wound down to the hollow behind my cabin. It was good for fishing trout in the spring, and its cold water made for a refreshing place to dip your feet in the summer. But by fall, when the leaves turned red and gold, the creek took on a different feel. The trees along the bank leaned in close, their branches almost knitting together over the water. Fallen leaves clogged the current, making a soft sound like whispers. The whole place seemed heavier. Folks in town said Ashburn Creek had a bad reputation. Hunters didn't like to track deer near it. Fishermen said the trout swam funny, like they were sick. Hikers who came through swore they felt watched, even in daylight. My uncle once told me flat out, "Don't stay too close to that creek after sundown. Things walk there that ain't people." I brushed it off, the way younger men do. But deep down, I always noticed how the animals stayed clear of the creek in the evenings. The woods would go quiet there, too quiet. That silence is what started my story. It was late October, the air crisp and sharp. I had just finished stacking firewood beside the cabin, getting ready for the colder nights ahead. The sun dipped behind a ridge around 6, leaving the valley already dim. I went inside, cooked myself a small dinner, and settled down with a book. By 9 o'clock, the woods outside were black. That's when I noticed it, the silence. Normally, the creek behind my cabin made a steady gurgling sound, broken now and then by frogs or crickets. But that night it was dead still. No frogs, no crickets. Even the water seemed muted. I put my book down and listened hard. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, almost like breathing. Not close, not in the room, but out there, near the creek. It was heavy, slow, dragging in and out. I stood, my heart thumping, and turned off the lantern. The cabin fell into shadow, and I crept to the window. The moon was half full, lighting the creek in pale silver. And I swear, just for a moment, I saw something standing by the water. It was tall, too tall for a man. Thin, pale, its head tilted as if it were sniffing the air. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, or a shadow from the trees. But the breathing, that heavy, wet sound, stayed in my ears long after I lay in bed that night. For the next week, little things kept happening. I'd find strange footprints by the creek. Not boots, not animal tracks, but long, narrow prints that sank deep into the mud. Too long for any man I knew. I'd wake up in the night and feel like someone was standing outside my cabin, just past the walls. Once, I thought I saw a face in the window, white hollow, with pits where the eyes should be. When I rushed to the door, nothing was there. I stopped going out after dark. I kept the lanterns burning later, but somehow that only made the shadows inside seem darker. One afternoon, I found my back door wide open. I knew I had bolted it. Inside, nothing was stolen, but there were wet footprints across the floor, leading from the door to the creek side of the cabin. They dried up before I could show anyone. That was the night I stopped pretending it was my imagination. It was early November when everything came to a head. I had just settled in for the evening when I heard it again. The breathing. This time louder. Closer. The cabin walls almost seemed to hum with it. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, loaded my old hunting rifle, and stepped outside. The night was clear and bitter cold. My breath steamed in the air. The creek shimmered under the moonlight. And that's when I saw them. Not one, but 3 figures stood across the water. They were tall, thin, their limbs too long, their skin pale like bone. Their heads were hairless, smooth, with nothing but hollow pits where eyes should be. They weren't moving, not at first, just standing there, shoulder to shoulder, facing me. My flashlight beam shook as I raised it, but no matter how I angled the light, their faces stayed in shadow. Then, as if one, they tilted their heads to the side, that same slow, unnatural angle. The breathing sound deepened, echoing off the trees, and I felt it in my chest like a vibration. I raised the rifle, my hands trembling, but before I could pull the trigger, they stepped into the creek. The water should have splashed. It didn't. They glided across, their feet not disturbing the current. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and slammed the cabin door shut. For hours, I heard them outside, moving, breathing, scratching against the walls, and then silence. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I stepped outside, and everything looked normal. No tracks, no damage. The creek babbled again like nothing had happened, but I knew they were real. For the next month, I saw them often, sometimes only one, sometimes more, always near the creek, sometimes closer to the cabin. Once, I woke to find one standing at the foot of my bed, its hollow eyes fixed on me, its face inches away. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then it was gone. I stopped eating, stopped working. My life became a waking nightmare of waiting for them. One night, desperate, I went to see an old Cherokee woman who lived farther down the mountain. People said she knew the old ways, the stories the settlers had forgotten. I told her what I had seen. She listened, then nodded slowly. She said the things I described were called the Hollow Ones. They were not spirits of the dead, but something older. Not alive, not dead, but bound to the creek, feeding on fear. Then she told me the worst part. Once the Hollow Ones notice you, they don't stop. You can move. You can pray. You can fight. It doesn't matter. They will follow you. They will breathe in your dreams. And they will take from you, little by little, until nothing is left. Her only advice was simple. Don't look into their eyes. Don't acknowledge them. Don't let them know you see. But it was too late for me, because every night, when I close my eyes, I still see their faces. And every morning, when I wake, I hear that breathing in the corners of my cabin. They never left. That is my story. That is my truth. The Hollow Ones of Ashburn Creek are real. I don't care if anyone believes me. I only care that maybe, if you find yourself near a lonely creek in the Appalachians, and you hear the woods fall silent, you'll remember this. Don't look. Don't listen. Don't breathe too loud, because once they know you see them, they will never, ever let you go. The story of Samuel Price and his encounter at Ashburn Creek is not an isolated one. What he lived through echoes dozens of whispered accounts from the Appalachian Mountains, stretching from Kentucky into West Virginia and the Carolinas. To locals, this isn't just a ghost story. It's part of a living tapestry of warnings passed down through generations. The figure Samuel describes matches what some locals call a hollow one. Unlike ghosts, hollow ones are said to be the leftover shells of people who died violently in the mountains. Not truly alive, but not completely dead either. They wander looking for warmth, sound, or life to fill the emptiness inside them. Their presence is marked by silence. Crickets stop, owls go mute, even wind seems to hold its breath when one is near. This detail matches Samuel's account. The entire forest grew unnaturally still before he first heard the dragging footsteps. Old hunters used to say, "If the mountain goes quiet, you should too, or else something hollow will notice you." Samuel is not the first to experience something there. Over the last century, multiple accounts have surfaced. 1912, a logger named Amos Clary vanished near Ashburn Creek. His axe was found lodged into a tree trunk, but his body was never recovered. His family claimed he had spoken of a man without a face, watching him days before his disappearance. 1937, two brothers camping near the creek told townsfolk they saw a tall, thin figure moving between the trees at night. They left their camp and hiked 12 miles barefoot just to escape, abandoning all of their gear. 1964, a young woman from Boone reported being followed home from the creek by a pale figure. For weeks, she claimed it stood at the edge of her property line, just inside the tree line, always watching but never crossing into the open. 2003, a group of college students exploring Ashburn Creek for ghost stories came back shaken, saying they heard heavy dragging footsteps circling their tent. When one of them shined a light outside, the beam landed on something tall and gray, standing too still to be human. None of them stayed past that night. When Samuel's story spread, older locals nodded knowingly. To them, it wasn't a surprise. It was a continuation of the same curse that had always hung over that stretch of forest. Most Hollow One stories end with people running and escaping. Samuel's case is far more disturbing because the figure did not stay in the woods. It followed him to his home. Why? Some Appalachian lore suggests that Hollow Ones are drawn to human energy when it is stirred by fear or defiance. Samuel fought back. By throwing his lantern, by standing against it, he gave it a reason to remember him. Just as in Story 2 with the Watcher, confrontation can serve as an invitation. It's possible Samuel carried something of the forest back with him. A curse, a shadow, or simply the creature's attention. And once a Hollow One notices you, it rarely forgets. Skeptics, of course, attempt to explain it. Some suggest it could have been a starving black bear, standing upright and mangy enough to look unnatural in the dim lantern glow. Others say Samuel's exhaustion, hunger, and isolation created hallucinations. Night in the Appalachians can do strange things to the mind. But those arguments falter when you consider the consistency of accounts across decades. So many unrelated witnesses describe the same impossibly tall figure, the dragging footsteps, and the feeling of being followed. If it were only the imagination, why would stories match so closely across generations? What truly makes Samuel's story haunting is not just his night at the creek, but the aftermath. Even months later, he continued to hear dragging steps outside his cabin. He caught glimpses of tall shadows retreating into the tree line. He woke from nightmares, certain something was just outside the window. And he was not alone. Some of his neighbors claimed the two began noticing strange silences in the forest, or seeing a pale shape on the ridge at dusk. It was as if, by encountering Samuel, the Hollow One had grown stronger or hungrier. The most disturbing possibility is this. Perhaps Hollow Ones are not bound to one place at all. Perhaps they can spread, attaching themselves to anyone who dares to confront or even acknowledge them. If so, Samuel may not have been the only one marked. The Appalachian Mountains are not just wilderness. They are old, heavy with stories and spirits. Places like Ashburn Creek hold a darkness that refuses to fade, fed by every death, every disappearance, and every frightened step taken in their shadow. Samuel Price survived his encounter, but survival doesn't always mean escape. Sometimes, it means carrying the presence with you. Sometimes, it means looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life, listening for footsteps that don't belong. And if the Hollow One truly followed him home, then the story does not end with Samuel. It waits, patient and silent, for the next person to wander too deep into those woods. You made it to the end, but remember, The story doesn't always end when the video does. If you'd like to support the channel, please like, share, and subscribe. We'll meet again. Until then, take care.